Hello YouTube, Hypertrophy Q&A number 2. So the point of these videos for people who are new, I take any question you might have about hypertrophy, which are usually going to be related with exercise selection, muscle activation, programming, and I answer them. All of the questions are in the description. If you have one, you just put it underneath the video in the comments, and if I've never answered it and it's interesting and we can share as a community, I will answer. So let's get right into it. Yuri B asks, do you really need direct ab work or is it enough with compounds? You absolutely need to isolate your abs. It's the same for every single muscle basically. The muscles that need no isolation are the muscles that are going to be targeted the most with heavy compounds. So for example, a type of muscle that would really need isolation would be like the quads, because when you do a knee flexion, they do most of the work. It's the same for the glutes in a sense. When you do deadlifts, when you do squats, your glutes are going to be targeted a lot. And in the same vein, chest, you will get a good chest from pure horizontal presses, etc. So the main movers of movements don't need isolation. But when you think about it, when you do something like a curl, most people would think of the curl as an isolation movement, right? But it's for the bicep. So it's a non-question in a sense, because you always isolate muscles. You are going to put more tonnage towards one muscle than the other, which already constitutes an isolation of sorts, if that makes sense. So yes, you always need to do something besides compound movements, because even if only compound movements worked, you would still need to do variations of the compounds to get more volume. So in a sense, there's almost no cases in which a muscle wouldn't need what we call isolation, unless you're a super novice, and in that case, just squats would be enough, as strength work. But for the abs fall outside of that category because it's like the real delts. Yes, they get activated when you do pulls, great. Do they get activated the way you want them to? Do they get destroyed the way you want them to? No, for the most part, they don't. And this is the reason why all of these people who tend to give that type of advice either don't have that good of a six-pack or they're on drugs, and in which case what they say don't matter because they get activation from the drugs. So of course it works for them. You need to think of the compound movements as a bracing, right? Which is extremely good for the core. It's good for the abs, for the obliques. It's going to make it thick and look good. But it's not enough because it's only a portion of the activation. The other portion is stretching movements. So I would say for most people, forget about planks and all that stuff. Do all of your bracing properly, with proper form, and you will feel that your core is doing a lot of work to stabilize the muscle so that you can push. And on the side, do leg raises and all of the stuff that stretches the abs, and you will see good results. But any type of advice that tells you to just neglect a muscle and just pray for it to grow doesn't work that way. If you want big forearms, you need to isolate the forearms. If you want big arms, you need to isolate the arms, etc. And as I go down the list, I usually tend to like the comments so that they're out of the way and I can just focus on the ones that are not liked. George asks, for next Q&A, what is your opinion on high-intensity training with one work set to failure? I'll make a video about it. The term high-intensity training is already a problem because anyone who trains properly for bodybuilding is doing high intensity at some point in the program. It's like saying high volume. Everyone does high volume to a point. But the extreme examples of high intensity and high volume that I see in programs that are made to represent those specific qualities tend to be awful because they tend to focus only on it. People who do high volume tend to only do volume. They never do intensity and they do junk volume. People who do high intensity tend to do way too low reps and volume, and therefore it also doesn't really constitute anything meaningful. I already covered that in the Hypertrophy series if you want to check it out, but you need both. The values exist together and volume doesn't exist without intensity. So if someone tells you, oh, I do high intensity, and it's the type of training that I've seen people do, what they're really saying is, I don't do enough volume. And that's not a good thing. And to go further with your example, George, with one work set to failure, that's way too low. For naturals, I'm personally of the mind that every single set, working sets, mind you, not warm-ups, need to be taken to failure. And by failure, I mean a rep short of failure, which would be failing the rep within the principle of rep in the tank that I personally apply to my strength folk. That's how I roll. I always go to failure because I think that's what gives the most gains. It's what makes the most sense. It's what allows for progression to be the easiest to track. And now there are studies showing up and saying that, oh, it doesn't work and it's better to not go to failure. I don't believe it. I've read some of these studies. Every single time the parameters have had an issue with them. The way the program was set up was clearly skewed towards proving their point. I personally go to failure. And the issue is that one set to failure means only one set that represents a meaningful amount of tonnage within a relevant intensity window. That's just not enough for naturals, so I don't like it. Mac sellout. How do you know if your workout intensity and volume is too high or too low, besides the feeling during the workout and the day after? Well, I'm going to tell you right now that the feeling during the workout means nothing, and the feeling of the day after means nothing. What do I mean by this? I'm not saying to not listen to your body. Your body is an extremely important messenger that you have to really pay attention to, because it's going to tell you when you're going to snap yourself up. But that's mostly for injury prevention. As far as tonnage, accumulation of volume, etc., your program is the boss, meaning that if you program accordingly, you know what you got to do on that day, and if your recovery is right, you will get it done. Don't listen to your body. The amount of time I've done warm-ups and I thought to myself, there is no way I'm going to get the reps I want on that day, and I was proved wrong, too many to count. And it's the same for the messages that your body are going to give you after, because soreness, you will find quickly, is not a good sign of muscle activation or hypertrophy at all, because it eventually goes away. Eventually you are not sore anymore, but you still progress. So did you stop making gains? No, it's just that your body knows your tricks, right? And the issue is that a lot of people, upon hearing that, will think, okay, I need to find a way to trick the body so that I get sore again. Well, that you missed the point. The body is now effective at repairing the muscles. So you mastered recovery. But those people think it's a sign that they're not making gains anymore. No, it's a sign that the muscle fibers get repaired enough that the body doesn't have to send you a signal to tell you, hey, you are really damaging me right now and I would need to take a break and chill. If you want to completely break that cycle and you want to slow down your gains, changing programs to confuse the muscles and get sore again is the best way to do it. A lot of people do it, it's not good. So that's for the end of your message. But as far as workout intensity and volume, that's easy. It's maximum recoverable volume, basically, meaning that as long as you progress, you can put weight on the bar, then you're all good, your volume is good. And you might think to yourself, well, I might be too low on the volume spectrum or intensity spectrum, but as long as you progress, who cares? Because progression is going to slow down eventually at some point. So keep riding that wave. You don't need to add volume or intensity if that still works. Keep riding that wave. On the flip side, if there's a lack of progression, that's a clear sign that something is happening. Or if there is regression. Regression is the best way to know that you're messing up, because it shows that you either didn't give yourself enough volume and intensity to be able to carry you through the next session to be able to perform at the same level or higher, which usually you need to be higher, or you did too much and now you're not just, it's not just that you can't perform at the same level, you perform underneath your normal level. That's a sign that you overreached. Some people would call it overtraining. For the most part, you overreached. And these are manifestations that your body are going to just display because of your lack of performance that need to be impacted in the program. It needs to have a repercussion on the program. And there's no magic way to know it, right? But you will find that once the program is really owned in, the process, it's smooth. You don't really have to rethink it. I never rethink most of the program I do because I always progress, because I spent a lot of time on the program. But you shouldn't worry too much about the intensity and volume being too high is worse than being too low, as long as progression remains constant. Because even if you could potentially be making better gains, who cares? It's okay. You're leaving some on the table, but you're still progressing. And it's not like you're going to be weighing 500 pounds of muscle within 5 years. So rejoice in the possibility of not having to care about that yet. Dude and Lee, that's quite the name. Hey Natty, hypertrophy. If you're just going for hypertrophy on the chest, do you think leg drive on the bench is useless? Interesting question. So the question is, since I'm just a bodybuilder and leg drive is usually for powerlifters who want to move more weight, do I care about the leg drive? Yes, I do, because it's a technical aspect of the bench that helps protect the shoulder. Why? The leg drive creates the arc in the back that helps tuck the shoulders, raise the chest, lowers the range of motion, and protect the rotator cuff. That's essential. Why? Because if you want to develop your chest, you're going to have to do a lot of horizontal pressing movements, and they tend to be taxing on the shoulder. So the less taxed the shoulder is, the more I can damage the chest muscle fibers, the bigger the chest grows. It's interesting to think about it in those terms. I know that bodybuilding has a bad reputation, and a lot of bodybuilders are seen as stupid, and they earned it, so I'm not going to, pity them for that. But any principle of lifting can be applied for bodybuilding and for hypertrophy. So this is why I have so much stuff to tell to you guys, is because it all applies. It all applies. Zarif Akhtab asks me, I'm still trying to figure out how to adjust volume on secondary movements on the easier weeks, and how to adjust my secondary volume on the harder weeks. First off, I personally don't have clear-cut hard weeks and easy weeks, because that would be too akin to a deload. I don't do that. I have fluctuations of the volume and intensity within the program that are going to stipulate that certain days will be strictly easier based on the average difficulty of the program for that level of intensity that I am at right now. So in a sense, if I understand your question correctly, you're wondering how that balance works. Well, it's going to be mostly the ability to see the program within a weekly schedule, meaning that you need to keep in mind intra-workout frequency and pair it with weekly frequency. This is why the two concepts are so important, and I distinguish them, because what you do on a Tuesday is going to be important for the Tuesday, for the exercise selection, the amount of volume, but it's also going to be important for the Thursday, because they still happen in the same week and they have interactions with one another, because you're going to be tired from all the work you've done on Tuesday. So the way I personally do it, the way I adjust volume on secondary movements, and it's secondary movements, not strength work, is I match it with the primary movements. So my strength work is my lighthouse. It's the flame in the dark. And this is why strength work is so important, because your question is resolved through it. You look at your strength work and the fluctuations of it. Is it high intensity this week? Is it high volume and lower intensity this week? Based on that, the secondary movements will have to be determined within the intra-workout frequency. So if you have a high intensity day for bench, you're going to do low reps on bench, the variation of the bench should be on the higher side with a lower intensity, potentially a weight that you could progress from, but just for this week, you're going to send back yourself. Why? Because there is a potential day coming, another upper day coming, that is going to have an impact on this, because you have to recover from that day before you start doing the other day. And the way the secondary movements are going to be connected is, for the most part, you're going to find that you might have to lower your expectations on the second day of the week for the second secondary movement. Maybe take a set off for that particular session, because you will have accumulated the fatigue of the first upper day, okay? And it's going to still carry over. Once you recover from that secondary day, then you're fine and you can reset, and potentially for that day, when you're going to be going back to that secondary movement, now you can progress. I hope that makes sense. If I say stuff and you don't get it, go to the hypertrophy series. I explain every single concept I give. If I had to re-explain the concept, those videos would take 15 hours. So that's the first one. And for the harder weeks, that's going to be the time where you might have to skip secondary movements. And I know it's going to represent a loss of tonnage, but sometimes it's best than to just do something that's not going to produce results. Meaning that if you have a hard week that represents high intensity and volume, you might be able to hack it for the first day. Meaning that you might be able to do your hard strength work, then your secondary movement, and then when you end up having to retrain the same area of the body again, you can only do strength work. I would tell you, if you have the choice between skipping the strength work or skipping the secondary movement, always skip the secondary movement. Even though in terms of injury prevention, it's not the best. In terms of tonnage and stabilization of tonnage, it's the best. Or you can do a sacrificial movement, do only your strength work, and I do that sometimes. It's actually quite effective. Only do your strength work for the first day, high volume, high intensity. Don't do secondary movement on that day. And then on the next day, do high intensity, low volume, for example, for the strength work and do the secondary movement. That way you balanced the tonnage out and you won't be as fatigued. I hope that makes sense. Zarif, if it doesn't, let me know in the comment. I will continue the discussion because it's important. This one is not in the right Q&A. Bablo begins, asks me, is my bench horrible for my weight? And you tell me that you are 150 and you bench 150 for 10. I would say that that's not horrible. I would also say that you shouldn't be focused on strength too much, even though strength is a measure of progression. You're very light. I don't know how tall you are, but you're very light. Okay, that might be something that's limiting you, but maybe you're light and skinny fat, and in that case, you don't want to get bigger, which I perfectly understand as well. In which case, I suppose the best thing for you would be to be doing a recomp. But don't worry too much about if your bench is strong or not. And as far as bench goes, I'm not the bench specialist at all, but you know, you tell me you do sets of 10. I don't know what type of set parameters are associated with that rep range. Try evolving rep ranges and tell me if you progress from them. George again, in your experience, what is the most effective exercise to directly target the obliques? Twisting motions? So basically he tells me twisting motions hurt my spine, and he asks if weighted side bridges work. Okay, so for me, I'm a guy with a very large waist, and what participates to that large waist is my obliques. They're big, they're chunky, they're big. I've never isolated them in my life. And that's sort of the flip side of what I said about isolation of the movement. Some people will tell you, oh, don't isolate the muscle, bro, because for me it grows with no isolation. Yeah, but that's just pure luck. It's just random. Some people will have very good muscles with no isolation. For some, usually sometimes, I've never seen anyone with big biceps who don't isolate them, or big long out of the tricep just out of the blue. But for the obliques, it's quite frequent. So I can't really tell you anything on this. I do squats and deadlifts, and that just builds my obliques. I think that anything that needs to, that requires a lot of core rigidity is going to build your obliques. Some people say that hanging leg raises to the side builds the obliques, and it also doesn't twist the spine, so you should be fine. Give them a try. What I really like to, sometimes, I don't know why, I like to feel the obliques stretch. So I lay on that bench, I do leg raises to tire the main core, and then I keep the leg perpendicular with the ceiling, and I go slowly to one side and the other. And I don't go all the way. It's not possible. Some people do the clock thing. I can't. I just slowly let the weight stretch, and when I can't anymore, I go back. So I suggest you give that a try. And if people have advice for George, which do not include twisting motions, please let us know. I'm just going to write, maybe not. Bon, ok. Peut-être la prochaine alors. Ok. Okay. We have Zarif again. Zarif, who is really interested and interesting. So let's get into it because it's a good question. So I don't care how many questions you post, I'm still going to answer. So he asked me, in terms of evolving rep ranges, what would be the progression for your secondary press? and he thinks that with the way I presented, back-off sets are merely there to fill the gap in volume. For me, first off, you need to distinguish between back-off sets and variations and secondary presses, because for me, a back-off set is going to be a replica of a movement. If there's a variation in the style of the movement, it's not a back-off set, it's a new set, it's a variation. So if you bench and you do a 3x5 and then you do an AMRAP, that's a back-off set. If you bench and do a close grip, that's not a back-off set, okay? That's an important distinction to make, because that's the semantics I apply when I talk about these things. And he tells me that I usually tend to get 25 to 30 intense and meaningful reps. That tends to be the case, yes. That's a good evaluation of it. And he says, and I'm just going to, because I just realized that he understands it. Got a lot of people like this who are like, I'm the same. You ask a question, and as you ask, as you write, you realize that you know the answer, so you write it. So I'm going to read it to you because that explains it. So this is how you apply progression and how you think about progression for secondary movements. It seems like you're essentially writing an intensification wave for your back-offs. Start with higher volume to lower volume, higher intensity, reset with slightly higher weight, repeat. If that's the case, it seems the goal isn't to focus on weight, but to use the weights to fill the gap in volume, because you need to repeat the sets enough that they eventually progress. And you can't increase both the secondary set, the secondary press and the main press. It applies to everything, okay? It's usually not the best idea to try to progress both on the main knee flexion like the squat and the front squat. One is going to progress more than the other. It's called what I call tonnage sacrifice, and it's to keep the tonnage balanced. It's perfectly fine, it's perfectly normal. It's not a plateau, it's a selection. It's a willed plateau. And naturally just trust that your back-off tonnage will increase over time when you add some direct tonnage to your main press. Yes, so you got it. And I would just reverse your logic here, because it also works the other way around. You can keep the strength hook tonnage stable and not progress there. Focus all of the progression on the second movement and see it feed into the strength hook. You need to understand that too. Progression is not driven by strength hook. That's not what strength hook is for. Strength hook is going to, of course, help progression. I'm not going to say anything about that, because it trickles down, and since it's a main movement pattern, it's going to feed your strength on every single movement that is in the same realm of specificity, okay? But the other way around exists too. There is a reciprocity here. Your front squat increasing is going to help your back squat increase. Does it help more than the back squat helps the front squat? No. Why? Because of the difference in tonnage. You move more weight with the back squat. After that, there are technical differences that are going to create walls between your ability to feed off of one lift or the other. Because the front squat is so technical, maybe your legs are getting stronger because of the back squat, but your front squat is not improving because your front rack is not strong enough. So the best example would be a post squat and a back squat. The post squat will help the normal back squat. The back squat will help the post squat. They feed each other. And to exemplify what he explains here, that I'm going to put in the description for you guys to read, because it's a good description. You do your main bench and you do one set of 4, and then you do 4 sets of spoto press, and you manage, maybe you start with 3 sets and you get 9 reps, 8 reps, 7 reps. As you progress, you're going to find that you might be able to do 5 reps and then 4 reps on the main bench, but that the reps on the spoto press don't increase. And you might think to yourself, well, what's going on? Well, it's simple. You are progressing on the spoto press because you're progressing on the main bench, which means that you enter the spoto press more fatigued, and yet you're able to match the reps, which shows that your muscles are getting stronger. And that reciprocity is going to eventually create a vacuum of a lack of progression, because the spoto press is going to always suffer from the high intensity of the strength work. That's something to keep in mind. But by virtue of the progression, eventually you're going to be able to progress on the spotter press and evolve and put weight on the bar. But it's going to take much more time that way than if you decided to promote the spotter press. And that's up to you, depending on your hypertrophic goals and what you think works the best for you. So great questions, Arif. Again, please ask more questions. And then oh yes, it's the last question and then we're finishing it here. Perfect. Cartif asks, hey bro, you think I can make similar gains like a bench press by doing weighted ring dips? Since I am currently training at home because of lockdown, I weigh 60 kilos, blah, blah, blah. Are weighted pull-ups and ring rows optimal for complete back development? So if you had asked me about rings on bars, I would have said yes, 100 times yes. It's an horizontal press. It's just as valid as the bench press. The only reason why people don't accept that fact is because it's not in the culture. But I can tell you that a dip might even be better than a bench press. Why? Because it gives a better stretch on the pectoral muscles, and on the shoulders you can go lower. With the bench you can't. Why? Because the bar limits the range of motion. That being said, when you look at the pathologies of the shoulders associated with the bench, you realize that the bar limiting the range of motion is actually a blessing in most cases, because it prevents people from snapping their shoulder. With the dip, a lot of people will get hurt on the dip. So you need to be able to control the range of motion very precisely. And that's the issue with the lift also. With the bench, you can have safeties. So you can never be really hurt by the bar. With the dip, you fail a dip, what are you going to do? You fall with the weight, it's going to snap your shoulders. So the dip is going to require a much higher control of your body and an understanding of intensity. I say that why? Because if you take the risks associated with the dip and you multiply them by 2, you got ring dips, because they're even more dangerous, okay? So I would say that yes, you can get excellent gains from the ring dips, but please be extremely careful with them. Don't go into the 3 to 5 rep range. Stay into the 6 to 10. It's going to prevent injury, especially since you're just doing that right now because the gyms are closed. Be careful. And also, I don't know how much you know about rings. Rings are very technical. Don't just jump into weighted ring dips. It's quite dangerous for the shoulders. So that's that. Be careful when you apply that. And I would even say that if you don't plan on continuing to do ring dips or dips for that matter, just do body weight. For now, just bite your tongue and do body weight. And then the last questions, are weighted pull-ups and ring rows optimal for complete back development? I would say yes. As far as lats goes and vertical pulls go, you only need pull-ups. And if you do them weighted, it's even better. And then ring rows, for me, horizontal rows are an issue for multiple reasons. I will make videos about it explaining why, but the ring rows are amazing. The only issue is that how do you load ring rows? Because your back is so close from the floor, how do you load it? Do you just use a weighted vest? And the weighted vest will be like, what, 10 kg? It's not enough. So the issue with the ring rows and that version of the horizontal row and the pattern that actually makes so much more sense than a row is that it's hard to load. So it's hard to progress, which is why I sell the rows, because I haven't found anything to actually mimic the weight I can move on the rows for the stretch on the upper back. So that's that. Ring rows are great. I do think that though that the combo you offer has one issue. It's going to be the real delts and it's going to be the traps, especially the upper traps. Shrugs are quite important. You can get upper trap activation from certain ring movements, but for me, it's so much easier to just shrug a weight or just do weighted stretch with a weight. So that's going to be that. And also, I'm just going to leave you with that. Be wary of minimalistic exercise selections for entire body parts. If you can get away with it, as I explained in the video, if you can get away with squats for your quads, then do it. But if you end up limited in your development and hypertrophic goals, do not just do this and say, no, I'm going to stick with my exercise selection because it's all I need. If you need something else, you add something else, period. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you so much for watching. Any questions you might have for the next hypertrophy Q&A that's going to happen in a month, please put them in the comments and I will see you next time.